These two characters are very similar. I know, Rings of Power sucks, Blue Eye Samurai is amazing. But is that fully true? Or is the problem the execution of the characters' storylines? Today, I want to explore Blue Eye Samurai storyline for Mizu versus the Galadriel storyline in Rings of Power. And if by the end of it I haven't convinced you that these two story arcs are the same, you can leave me an angry comment down below. But if I have convinced you that the problem with Galadriel was not that she was overpowered, but that they executed her storyline poorly, then you have to leave me a thumbs up. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. So I'm shooting this video outside today in celebration of Tolkien. This is the Finnish forest, or a part of it, close to my home. And Tolkien famously loved the Finnish language so much, he based Elvish off it, and he drew on the Kalevala for some of his inspiration for his mythology. And the Kalevala, of course, is our national sort of mythology and origin myth. And if you're interested in what goes on in there, I did make 2 shorts on it, which you can check out in the information card. Okay, so let's talk about Rings of Power first. One of my biggest problems with Rings of Power is that nothing is given room to breathe. They moved through the show way too fast. I think that had they planned to end their 10-episode run with Halberd ensconced with the Elvish artificers and beginning to work on the rings, that would have made for a much more compelling story. If you left the viewer with that doubt of, is Halberd Sauron? Is he going to lead the elves wrong here? And you know that it's going to happen. I mean, we all know what's going to happen. The Rings of Power get forged. But it would have made a much more compelling story if they had given a whole season to the Rings' actual creation, in my opinion. And because of this rush to both get everything in place and get to the point where the rings are forged, the end of the season especially feels way overrushed. So definitely that is one of my major complaints with the Rings of Power overall. In contrast, Blue Eye Samurai does take its time. It sets up everything beautifully, and then it doesn't in the end rush off to have Mizu be in London as well. Instead, we have a slow growth of the storyline as Mizu grows, and then we end with her sailing to London, leaving the second season open for that. But it's not just the overall rushedness that's the problem. The problem is both Galadriel and Mizu have internal story arcs, or what I call internal story arcs, which essentially means they don't grow in power. They come out the box with their power fully formed. Now, I'm familiar with this kind of setup because that is what I did for Louis, my main character in Sangwheel Chronicles. When you meet Louis, he is a peak assassin. His story goals is not to grow to be more powerful. The problem with these kinds of storylines is that they are really hard to pull off. It is difficult to pull off a storyline where you have an essentially overpowered character. You have a character who is settled at their peak power. Now, let's start with Mizu. Okay, so when we meet Mizu, she is a hyper powerful samurai. She has her sword skills, she's already trained, she's ready to rock and roll. But her growth arc has got nothing to do with her power. Her growth arc is to learn not to sacrifice everything on the altar of her vengeance. And one of the key ways in which she learns this is through Ringo. So Ringo joins Mizu right in the first episode. Okay, so Mizu comes into a bar, she brings a knife to a gunfight, she beats the snot out of the gun because, again, overpowered character at the peak of her powers. And Ringo, who's a guy with no hands, is like, oh, I am in, I am all there, I want to be this woman. Okay. So off the two of them go, tromping into the wilderness, except Mizu keeps turning Ringo away. She's like, go back, Ringo. At one point, she ties him to a tree. She pays for him to spend 3 nights in a brothel. She does all kinds of things to get rid of him. And this dude just won't go. And eventually, she kind of makes peace with him being there, especially after he does actually help her in a situation where she's about to get slaughtered and, Ringo is there for her. Okay. So Ringo starts traveling with her. Now, Ringo is a key part of this learning process of Mizu's. Ringo provides a very, very different perspective from Mizu. Mizu is hardcore driven by revenge. She kills everything and anyone that stands in her way. Her goal is vengeance, and she will not be swayed from it. But Ringo provides the viewer with a much more morally nuanced perspective. Ringo is the one who points to a moral course, even though he looks up to Mizu. And Ringo is 100% there for Mizu until he's not. And through his actions, she learns that she is on the wrong path. But before we get to this pivotal moment, because we will talk about that very pivotal moment and the epic quality of episode 5 storytelling, let's first go back to our girl Galadriel and why her not having such a character, or why such a character not playing a deep enough role, is problematic in her storyline. I could have picked a warmer day for this, Okay, so Galadriel. Her story arc is to learn that she needs others, to learn not to be so arrogant, to learn that she is not all that in a bag of chips. And I feel that this story arc is important to Galadriel because when we see her in Lord of the Rings, she is offered the Ring of Power and she turns it down. That is a person of immense moral fortitude. But you can't start with a character at that level of moral fortitude and the level of power that Galadriel has. That kind of moral fortitude ideally comes from a struggle. And I think that that is what they were trying to show in this series. So Galadriel starts out as uber powerful, and we see that in her opening scene where she takes out the troll that everybody else struggles against. But we also see her arrogance. The king says to her, go back to the lands of the West. And Galadriel refuses based on nothing more than herself. She literally disobeys her king because she believes herself to be wiser. That is an immense step of arrogance. So she is set up in the same way that Mizu is, as being on the wrong side of this moral theme. In Mizu's case, it's revenge, where revenge drives everything about Mizu. And in Galadriel's case, it's arrogance. Her arrogance is her downfall, basically. So I realized, as I was walking home, that I hadn't actually said right up front one of the major similarities between Galadriel and Mizu, and that is both of them are driven in their storylines by the death or being missing of someone they could not possibly have helped because they were children. But in the case of Mizu, her mother's death is shown to us gradually, whereas in Galadriel's case, the whole story just gets info dumped on us in one foul swoop. So I think that that is important to understand as we head into the video, and not just at the end of it, where I will put this into more context. When you have a character like that, you do need somebody like Ringo that helps the audience understand that storyline and provides a moral compass eventually for the character that is on the wrong side of this theme. In Rings of Power, I think there are two characters that are supposed to fill this role for Galadriel. The one is Elrond, who does very well in the opening few episodes. But Elrond then goes off on his own adventure, not sticking with Galadriel. So you have your first problem with the Galadriel storyline, which is the swap in moral compass characters. Okay, so you can pull off that kind of swap, but it is hard. So you don't necessarily want to do that. In my book, in The Hidden Blade, when Louis was going through the bulk of his storyline in this regard, I used the character of Raoul as that moral compass for Louis. And he, much like Ringo, is a young man, although he's more skilled than Ringo, but he's a young man who is much more innocent and much more of a straight shooter than Louis, who's an assassin. In the same way, we have Elrond, who is much more moral than Galadriel is and tells her to obey the king. When she refuses, she meets Halberd. But Halberd cannot serve this role because he is Sauron, as we all know by now. So Halberd is her foil. He's not her guide. So then they get fished out of the ocean with Elendil. And I think that the goal of the writers was to use Elendil as this moral compass character for Galadriel. But the problem is, again, they didn't give this storyline time to breathe. There wasn't enough deep and meaningful interaction between Galadriel and Elendil for him to serve as this moral compass character for her. And in the end, while he is devastated, it is not her direct actions that sends him into a state of devastation and thus drives the point that her arrogance will be the downfall of everyone around her and ultimately of herself. And that is the lesson that you need to get from the moral compass character, is they either need to take the hero to task for their actions, or they need to be so negatively impacted by the hero's actions that the hero, through that consequence, can see that they are going down the wrong path. In Elendil's case, neither happened. That being said, there is a Rings of Power Season 2, and the writers do have the opportunity to salvage the storyline if either Elrond, who Galadriel reunites with at the end, or Elendil does take her to task for her arrogance in bringing Halberd into the situation where he could forge the Rings of Power. But having spoken about how Elendil failed, let's talk about the inflection point where everything could have changed for Galadriel, where she could have started the learning process. Could have chosen a better time too, one with less freaking planes flying overhead. Let's talk about Numenor, which is where, in my opinion, Galadriel's storyline should have started the change process, where her character arc should have reached the point where she's gone, maybe I am a little bit too arrogant. And then she backs away from it because the climax is still to come. The climax isn't there yet. In Numenor, I can see that they tried to put in place some of the elements of a turning point. Galadriel shows her arrogance in Numenor, and she is imprisoned by Miriel. And I think that their goal was, in the end, Elendil has to speak for her, she escapes, she has to see the king, and all of that kind of thing. But this sequence of events in Numenor could have been vastly more impactful. If in Numenor they had Galadriel really get into trouble with her arrogance and have Elendil actually have to rescue her, like diplomatically rescue her, because she is going to end up in a position where she alienates the entirety of the race of man, and thus the Southlands gets no aid. They could have emphasized this further. In the library, Galadriel could have misinterpreted some historical fact, and her arrogance in being corrected could have led her to explore an incorrect path. And Elendil could have brought her back and helped her gain a better understanding. It would have been more impactful to have focused on her starting to see that she shouldn't be so arrogant. And then she has the interaction with Halberd. She believes he's the king of the Southlands, and she, starts like pushing for him to come. And she goes, no, actually I am right and everybody else is wrong. But she's had that moment of doubt, and so has the viewer. And that moment of doubt gives us that first step on the learning process. And that first step is so critical. The Numenor scenes were very pretty, and Galadriel showing her arrogance, Galadriel's interactions with Miriel, with Elendil, and with Palantir were all good, but they lacked punch. They lacked the depth necessary for an internal storyline to take hold. So, let's turn to Mizu and the absolute epic nature of her inflection point and why it worked so well. The episode I'm referencing here for Mizu is, of course, episode 5, The Tale of the Ronin and His Bride. In this episode, Mizu is facing off against a veritable army, and she's running around inside of a geisha house trying to protect the people inside it. But there is also flashbacks happening during this period, which shows more of her history unfolding. And there is simultaneously a giant puppet theater going on that tells us this mythological story of the Ronin and his bride, and how his bride turns into a hungry ghost monster. Now, I would never have said in a million years that you could pull off flashbacks inside an action episode with giant puppet theater to contrast it, and it would work. But man, this episode was so well done. The flashback integration really, really worked, because we have Mizu going in and out of consciousness as she is attacked and as she falls down, and her wounds and blood loss and so on and so forth. And the flashbacks match what's going on with the giant puppets, the story that's being told there, the story we're being told of the Ronin and his bride. And at first it seems as though Mizu is the Ronin in the story. She's driven by revenge. But then she becomes the bride in the end because she marries a guy in the flashbacks, and she gives up her revenge, and we learn that she'd been ready to let it go and to just be this guy's bride, and they'd fallen in love. And then probably her mother turns on her, gives her identity up to the gods. People come for her. She thinks it's her husband who turned on her. He says no, but he had reacted poorly to her beating him in a sword fight. And the whole thing goes to pot. Both mother and husband die, and Mizu resumes the path of vengeance, now fully committed to this road of vengeance is the only thing that matters. And at the same time, we have this fantastic story of the Ronin and his bride playing out, where the Ronin believes he has gotten revenge on the clan that wronged him, and then he learns that his bride was one of that clan, and he kills her and his son, and her ghost becomes this vengeful spirit. So all of this is amazing. We get this incredible backstory. We get this action-packed scene with Mizu fighting these bad guys in the geisha house. It's fantastic. Then at the end of the episode, there are guards who come for one of the people that Mizu's met, and that is Princess Akemi. And at the end of it, there's now guards who are dragging Akemi away, and she begs Mizu to protect her because they've sort of interacted, and Akemi helped Mizu in this fight and everything else. And Mizu is like, no, you better take her to the guards. You better take her to go be married to her prince. And so Akemi is dragged away. And Ringo turns to Mizu and he's like, you are no samurai. He rejects this behavior of hers and he leaves. And then the camera pans all the way out and we realize that Princess Akemi has been watching this giant puppet theater, and she then says, you know, actually this hungry ghost is all bad. There's nothing redeemable in her because, of course, she's now experienced Mizu. Now, Mizu's reaction to Ringo telling her that, you know, she's not a samurai, etc., she's like, I never claimed to be, you're the one who claimed that, and she, you know, goes on her way of vengeance. But it opens the first cracks. It makes it so that Mizu starts to realize that maybe this isn't the right path. And then through the rest of the season, she slowly but steadily makes progress at becoming less vengeance-driven until at the end, where she doesn't kill the dude she's been meaning to kill, instead taking him up on his offer to go to London and perhaps find her father. So she's still pursuing vengeance, but she actually did stop to help her friends. So there is some reduction in that vengeance drive. And that's the best you can hope for in internal story arcs, because you don't want to go from zero to hero or from hero to zero, depending on how you look at it. You want this to be a steady, incremental growth process. And with Mizu, that is what we got. With Galadriel, we didn't. There wasn't enough growth in Galadriel's story. And in the end, it was just, look, here it is revealed. You brought Halberd into the situation, and now he has forged the rings of power, and everything has gone to pot because of you. But the story didn't batter her arrogance enough for this overcome to feel deserved. They didn't drive her into the depths enough times and give her time and chances to realize that her arrogance is her downfall, which they did give to Mizu. So the writers of Mizu, in my opinion, succeeded in this internal storyline because they gave her enough room to breathe. Okay, so what is my takeaway from this? First, do you agree with my thesis? Did Galadriel's storyline essentially fail? Not because she was overpowered, but because they didn't pull off the arrogance to humility growth arc that they needed. Whereas with Mizu, from vengeance to a kinder perspective, they did pull off the storyline. Let me know what you think. Secondly, if you are writing this kind of internal story arc where the hero is effectively overpowered, but there is this internal story arc, what do you need to do? 1. The reader needs to understand the forces that shaped the character. In Mizu's case, this is done through extraordinarily powerful flashbacks. In the case of our girl Galadriel, this is done very poorly. We can see in the first episode that there are some flashbacks, but basically the writers just info dump the whole of Galadriel's history in one go in that opening episode. And her interaction with her brother is not as meaningful and as deep as it should have been. His death is what drove her to this arrogance, in the same way as Mizu's mother's death drove her to this vengeance. In both cases, they were driven by trying to protect somebody that they had no hope of protecting. And we, the viewer, need to understand that. We need to understand that this was things that happened to them as children when they could have done nothing about what happened to them, but they still feel responsible. In Mizu's case, it was well done. In Galadriel's case, the flashbacks needed a lot more integration, and they needed to be spread out more so that we, the viewer, could get to experience her unfolding story gradually rather than having it all dumped on us. 2. The story as a whole needs room to breathe. The pace of Rings of Power was off. It was off entirely, and I think they did themselves a disservice. And 3. You need some kind of pointer character to the moral apex of the story. You need a Ringo. You need Elendil to be much more involved in Galadriel's decision-making. You need someone to point the hero in the right direction, or to hold the hero to account, or to be directly affected by the hero's actions. You need that so that the hero can grow and learn. And without those 3 things, your internal storyline, in my opinion, won't work. What do you think? Did I prove that the growth arc of these 2 ladies are actually very much the same? Or do you dispute my thesis? Let me know in the comments down below. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. And if you are interested in checking out how I did the internal storyline of Louis, then you can pick up The Hidden Blade on the links down below, which is the first in my epic fantasy series, Sangwheel Chronicles. And if you enjoyed this video, you might also enjoy my video on overstuffed storylines, which you can check out over there. Or you can trust the algorithm's recommendation and watch another video on my channel, which always helps with a love of YouTube. And I will see you soon for another episode from Just in Time Worlds.